I'm Zach Martin. This is our very first interview here on TIC Radio. The InvestmentCenterStudios.com is where we're broadcasting from. I have my good friend, legendary Lee Abrams, on the line with us today. We're going to discuss what's going on in the business of radio. It always seems like just when you think you never seen something before, you'll see something you never seen before again. Isn't that pretty much the summation of what's going on?
Yeah, that's pretty well put. It's a crazy time right now.
Well, I've seen a lot of things about going bankrupt for some companies, about layoffs and furloughs. The furloughs is a real interesting thing if you know anything about business, which I know you do. It's a great way of getting out of having to pay severances while you hold the benefits package over the person's head, which is kind of, I think, not fair. You know what? I'd like to predict that we're going to see some lawsuits down the road as a result of this.
Oh, I'm sure we will. This thing's not over yet, and there will be a lot of fallout once things stabilize.
What do you think is the biggest problem for radio? How did it get this bad when you see all of these different companies going bankrupt and, the CEOs are doing very well for themselves at the same time? What's going on with that?
Yeah, it's a deregulation domino effect. Where it looks like a good idea on paper at first, and then in reality, it all comes crashing down. These companies are scrambling. They're in the survival mode, and you add a fragile economy, and it's big trouble. And there is innovation, but it's usually innovating for survival, innovating in cost savings and innovating in things like furloughs, as you just mentioned. So it's not unlike other businesses that go through the deregulation issue. Airlines are the same way. They're very fragile in tough times, and it's hard to say that the deregulation is good for passengers. Maybe a little bit in the cost savings because you have low cost carriers now, but as far as customer service and quality of the flying experience, it's a lot like radio. It's not what it used to be.
Well, it is to serve the public, for the public good, whether it's the airlines or radio. We're supposed to be really involved with the communities. We're supposed to keep them updated on what's going around them in their communities. We're supposed to help the small businesses. Along the way, I think, especially in the bigger cities, small businesses got left behind because they were no longer able to afford advertising on the radio to help increase their brand awareness, and then maybe do some digital campaigns on top of that. So they priced the people out. They were always going after the gigantic clients, always trying to make the big splash. Now you've got 4 or 5 major corporations in one city all going for the same slice of the pie, and not too many of them are even paying attention to smaller retail sectors.
No, it's very true. It's, again, the whole thing... deregulation is based on a large scale, and the little guy gets cut out of the equation.
Well, when we look at the purpose of having a broadcast license, what is the basic concept of why should one person get the license over another? And if citizens see and hear that their local radio stations are not doing the job that they're supposed to do, what can the average listener do about that?
Well, realistically, not much. They can stop listening to radio and reporting it in the ratings to where it just forces, a total reimagination of stations, but that probably won't happen. So, I think they're stuck. They either got to dramatically reinvent themselves or suffer the consequences, and I already see some of the consequences happening now. And there's a lot of denial out there in the broadcast industry about everything's great, but it's not. It's people are migrating more and more to alternative listening methods, whether it's satellite or streaming, and that's just going to get stronger and stronger. But they don't really have much recourse other than just stopping listening, stopping supporting them, and maybe then they'll get the idea. The thought of going to the FCC or something, that'll never work.
You can't challenge
sort of campaigns to bring back great radio. That won't work.
You can't challenge the licenses?
Yeah, I don't think that would go anywhere, and you have to be very well coordinated and well-heeled to, afford all the legal costs. And I don't know how receptive the government would even be to that.
Interesting point. Now, one of the problems that I find with radio, and you've probably heard this in the halls, Lee Abrams, over the years, we're not like other businesses, except when they have to be like other businesses. So what is it? Are you not like, or are you like? And then when they start talking about they're like other businesses, and I look at the leadership overall, I think to myself, woefully unprepared and uneducated. Or I should say, undereducated.
Oh my God, yeah. It's that's one of the great cliches that we're different, we're special. No, you got to create an amazing product and generate, since it's an entertainment-oriented business, generate fans from that who support your advertisers. And it's not unlike any other business. Certainly not unlike other entertainment entities.
I look at the HD spectrum and how we can do more with one channel, and from my point of view and my perspective, I look at that as a low barrier to entry. I look at that as a place where guys like me who really want to go for it can afford to jump in there and start playing around and developing the formats, making it affordable for the smaller retailer businesses. Let me just give you a case in point. I could make money just charging $10 a spot. Most businesses can do $10 a spot. All I need to do is earn about, on average, $60 an hour to make ends meet, to actually make a profit, Lee. And that's in New York City. What do you think about that kind of approach?
Well, I think it reminds me of the early days of FM, almost an exact comparison, particularly where guys could experiment, try new things at a very low cost, and some of those things clicked, and now then over time they became giants. So I think there's that same thing you can compare in terms of HD.
Okay, and when we look at the landscape, how can radio do a better job with helping out the local artists, the national artists? There's a lot of great music out there, a lot of unsigned bands. What can we do to be, I think, a little bit more proactive and really make a difference in the community with the artist and to the people that we reach?
Well, I think you got to make sure that the artist is really good. There's a tendency for people to say, "Oh, this local band is great," whereas they're really not. However, with that said, there are some bands that are really good and not getting their fair exposure. And I think it's up to the radio stations to be very selective and not just play anybody, but really find the right one or ones over time and really support them, get behind them, play the hell out of them. And again, you can look back to the 60s where I'm in Chicago, and I was living in Chicago then. There was a vibrant local music scene, but the big stations, WLS and WCFL at the time, were very selective and played just the cream of the crop, which then was the Crying Shames and the Buckinghams and New Colony Six and Shadows of Night and others. But they really got behind them. I think that's more effective and better for artists if the stations are really selective, and then once they select you, the artist, really go for it and expose it and get behind it, support it. Much better than just sort of playing anything because it's local. Because again, realistically, most of the local stuff is good, and you may go to the bars and see them, and you may even know the members and all that. But can they compete with the superstars of today? That's a very select group. But if they exist, again, be selective, get behind them, and I think that's the best thing.
And on the other side of that, you can always support those bands that probably don't make it on the airways on websites, because people like to go to shows and they like to.
Oh, sure.
It helps the local restaurants,
many alternatives.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's good stuff. Now, what is your take on radio programming overall? What really frustrates Lee Abrams when he listens and sees what he sees as we check out the radio landscape?
Well, that's a long list, but some of the key things are one, the lack of evolution. You still hear stations doing the twofers and block parties, and that stuff was great 50 years ago, but it hasn't evolved. Personalities that really aren't. They're just liner card readers that really are adding nothing to the mix. Mm-hmm. We had a station at XM, which was a classic rock type station, top tracks sort of thing, and they had no DJs because what's a DJ going to say? We couldn't find a DJ who could say anything about Freebird or Layla again. So the personalities that really aren't, and the lack of developing ones that really are, some of the cliches and slogans, mm-hmm. The best, the greatest, the most variety. Well, it's just America's BS detector is set on high. That stuff just doesn't mean anything anymore. A lot of station names, too, sound like laundry detergents, Fresh, The Breeze. That kind of drives me nuts. And just the fact that in today's environment, which is so competitive with satellite and internet radio and other forms, streaming and all that, it should be on a creative, A game. And instead, it's just some focus group hell that's based on 80s sort of thinking in a time when, it's 2020 and stations need to be on creative overdrive. Right now, the tendency for a station is to have a funny morning show, and then just sort of cruise through the rest of the day, liners and very vanilla production, mm-hmm. and predictable playlists and autopilot. Instead of looking at it as a serious entertainment entity that's in a competitive situation and needs to just be at the top of its creative game. So there's a lot wrong with it. And again, most of it is just very robotic, very similar. And there are misinterpretations to that, because I'm not talking about, start talking a lot and playing weird music. That's not it at all. It's, if anything, study the stations, the great stations of the 60s and 70s that had these huge ratings and reinterpret what they were doing for today. And I think you could find, a lot of things that can be reimagined for the 21st century and elevate a station's creativity to new levels.
Were we separated at birth? Because somehow I'm thinking the same thing as you're thinking, and you know what I'm up to. I can't talk about everything, but yeah, I'm on the same page with you. And when I look at, for instance, a classic rock station, I think that you're doing yourself damage by being the best or New York's classic rock, when you should just focus on being rock. If 60% of what you play is traditional classic rock, great, but you're really painting yourself in a corner where you can't move out of it. It's you'll only disappoint people if you say we're the kings of classic rock and that's it. As you know, I hosted the Ultimate Classic Rock Show. All right, that's great, but what happens when that older audience is no longer available, especially at night? So after I got launched from that syndicated show, I thought, well, if these morons can do it, anybody can. And I created the Big Fat American Rock Show, which big, fat, it's American. But pretty much, I could, it's fun. I'm having fun with it. Most people do have a weight problem across the United States. I try to engage the listeners. I try to get them to text or call. I do things on Facebook, all of those different things, and make it an inclusive invitation for everybody to attend and just hear what's going on. But one of my criticisms of the disc jockeys, you have your list about the program directors, is I think that a lot of disc jockeys lose touch with the common person. They don't understand that the median income is $35,000 a year in certain areas, and it's a combined income, and nobody can really pay their bills anymore. You get these guys, I was hanging out with Mick Jagger the other day, and then we went over to Elton's place, and we drank a few, who gives a crap, right? It's not relatable.
That's sort of elitist thinking.
Yeah, and what I don't like is when the disc jockey paints a picture that he's in an apartment that has wooden floors, it's nice white, he's got some nice art pieces, and, so clean and kind of boring, to be honest with you. I like my disc jockeys to be authentic. I like them to express themselves, and you don't have to talk very long to do that. It's the way you say things. It's how you say things.
It's word economy, right? And attitude, and meaningful conversation rather than just, rote.
All right, as we get through these times where we have COVID-19 and then the civil unrest and we got an election coming up, give us some key insights of where you see radio going. And if you were to talk to a up-and-comer person who wants to be part of the radio industry, just some things that they really need to think about before they...
Well, I think they need to think hard because in today's environment, I don't know if the best and brightest really want to go into the current state of radio. So I would look at, again, other options other than terrestrial, unless they have a really great new idea they think they can sell to somebody. More of the opportunity might be on the internet side. In time, the Amazons and Apples and all those guys, Google, will get into radio in a serious way, and the bigger opportunities might be there because they'll probably do things a lot differently and reject the traditional thinking that mars radio right now.
Well, Amazon has already been doing that in Google as well, and I'll explain it to you. Because of the way the laws are written, you no longer have to have your studios in a city of license, which means, and after COVID-19, a lot of companies are rethinking about staying in places like New York City. You're paying a lot for that landscape, for that real estate. It makes no sense, and everything is economy to scale. So what we have done with our radio products, whether it's New HD, TIC Radio, which is a business radio station, KKNH, which is a station for the world, we do need the terrestrial signal like in HD because of the licensing issues. You're well aware of that. Having just a music station online is going to kill you. You can't make money for the most part. But what we're using as our backbone are the AWS, Amazon Web Services. We're using a product out of England called Playout One. We're using Music One and Traffic One, that's out of Texas. Steve Warren, that's his product. Very economical, low cost to operate, really robust, gets what you need done. And then you have to have a couple of good engineers who are able to, shift it to when we have to go live. But having said that, I can have people throughout the country from their home with decent microphones, the way the processing is set, and broadcast from wherever they are. So that means, first off, I don't have to pay a disc jockey as much money. Now, the only problem I'm going to have is a pushback from the unions, but I'm sorry, they should have really had forward thinking a long time ago. The second part is, again, the idea that we can deliver these formats much cheaper than traditional broadcasters. So I think that there's where we're going to see some shifts, and it could be small companies like mine that end up programming for bigger companies so that reduces their personnel cost and increases their profitability. But they're going to have to learn on the terrestrial side, these big companies, how to work with the little guys again and to really shift their thinking. One of the biggest problems is greed. Right?
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. It makes total sense.
So with that in mind, if you were to build, now that you're back in a consultancy again, if you were to build the Lee's station, I know you've built them in the past, so what would you like to do now?
Build a station. I just got to figure the right platform to put it on. I'd like to do just the most amazing radio station that's ever been heard. And I think it's very doable, and it doesn't take brilliance. It's just a lot of common sense, and again, reinterpreting some of the golden rules and attributes of radio. And I think it would be huge. And there could be, I'd like to do it for many demographics. I think the older ones, 40 and over, is where the gold mine is, just because those people have such rich histories with radio. Mm-hmm. When I was at XM, I remember we did some research early before we launched and found that younger people, you explained what satellite radio was, and they'd go, why in hell would I want 100 radio stations? Radio sucks. Then you talk to the older people, and it's like, oh, yeah, you mean a station that sounds like, and they describe one of their favorite stations of the past. And you'd say, yeah, just like that, except, on satellite and very now instead of just repeating what was done then. And he's like, yeah, where do I sign up? So, but I'd like to do that. We did that sort of at XM early on. They've changed it quite a bit, but the early first 10 years of XM was, it was just writing the playbook as we went along, and there were some pretty interesting channels on that system then.
I kind of like what I'm hearing, and I'll repeat what I said long ago via fax. I've told you this story. I got to repeat it. Hey, Lee, hire me.
Right.
I like the way you think. How can somebody follow you, Lee Abrams?
Go to my website, which is LeeAbramsMediaVisions.com, and we can keep in touch through there. Or, of course, I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. And if you want to send me a direct email, it's N101XM, N as in November, 101 X-Ray Mike @gmail.
Thank you very much, Lee Abrams, for joining us here at TIC, the InvestmentCenter.com studios. And we'll talk to you real soon because we got to be updated about what's going on in the radio world.